For decades, the Mongol army crushed every force that dared to stand in its path. Kings surrendered, cities burned, and entire civilizations vanished under their hooves. Everyone believed the Mongols were unstoppable. Then, in the year 1260, a small valley called Ain Jalut became the stage for a shocking reversal. What happened there was not brute strength, but a secret trick so clever it shattered the Mongol myth forever. By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol army was more than a military force. It was a living nightmare. Across Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, their arrival meant the same ending every time: walls shattered, armies erased, and cities turned into silence. The Mongols did not just conquer territory. They crushed the will to resist. Long before their horses appeared on the horizon, fear had already done half the work for them. Many cities surrendered without a fight. Believing resistance would only invite total annihilation, the Mongols earned this reputation through terrifying consistency. Their cavalry moved faster than any army of the age, their archers could fire accurately at full gallop, and their commanders coordinated movements with ruthless precision. They mastered psychological warfare, spreading rumors of massacres so horrifying that entire regions collapsed in panic. Once battle began, they used deception, feigned retreats, and sudden encirclements to destroy enemy formations piece by piece. Armies that tried to stand firm on open ground were surrounded and slaughtered within hours. What made the Mongols truly dangerous was not just their tactics, but the belief that they could not be beaten. Generals who faced them often entered battle already defeated in their minds. This myth of invincibility became the Mongols' strongest weapon. It paralyzed decision-making, encouraged surrender, and ensured that resistance was fragmented and weak. By 1260, the world had accepted one simple truth: the Mongols always won. No one believed that a single battle in a remote valley could ever change that belief. And yet that certainty was about to be shattered. The myth of Mongol invincibility. By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol army was no longer seen as a normal military force but as a force of destiny itself. Across Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, their name inspired pure terror. Cities did not wait to see Mongol banners on the horizon before surrendering. Many opened their gates simply from stories alone. Every tale sounded the same: armies wiped out in hours, walls torn down, populations erased. The Mongols moved faster than any force the medieval world had ever known, striking without warning and vanishing before enemies could react. Their horse archers could fire with deadly accuracy while riding at full speed, turning battlefields into killing fields where slow infantry stood no chance. Even experienced generals failed against them, not because they lacked courage, but because they faced tactics they could not understand or counter. Feigned retreats lured enemies into reckless pursuits, sudden encirclements crushed formations, and relentless pressure broke morale long before swords met shields. Fear became the Mongols' greatest ally. Once panic spread, discipline collapsed, and once discipline collapsed, defeat was guaranteed. Over time, this pattern created something far more powerful than weapons or numbers: the belief that the Mongols could never lose. This belief poisoned resistance before it began. Kings hesitated, commanders doubted themselves, and soldiers marched into battle already expecting death. By the year 1260, the Mongol Empire seemed unstoppable, an unstoppable storm rolling westward with nothing left to block its path. The idea that any army could stand against them, let alone defeat them in open battle, sounded like madness. And yet this myth, built on fear and endless victories, would soon face its greatest challenge in a place no one expected. The fall of Baghdad and the collapse of certainty. In the year 1258, the Mongol war machine struck one of the most important cities on earth, Baghdad. For centuries, Baghdad had been a symbol of learning, wealth, and spiritual authority. It was not just a city, but the beating heart of the Islamic world, home to scholars, libraries, and the Abbasid Caliph himself. Many believed its status would protect it. They were wrong. When the Mongols arrived, they showed no respect for history, religion, or culture. The siege was swift and brutal. Mongol engineers dismantled defenses with terrifying efficiency, while their armies sealed every escape route. Once the walls fell, what followed was devastation on a scale rarely seen even by Mongol standards. Streets ran red with blood, buildings burned for days, and the legendary libraries of Baghdad were destroyed, their books thrown into the river until the water was said to run black with ink. The caliphate, which had stood for over 500 years, was erased in a matter of days. News of Baghdad's fall spread across the Middle East like a shockwave. Fear turned into despair. If Baghdad could fall, then no city was sacred and no power was protected. Rulers everywhere understood the message clearly: submission or annihilation. The psychological impact was immense. Armies lost the will to fight, and cities chose surrender over resistance, believing death was inevitable either way. The Mongols did not just defeat Baghdad militarily. They shattered the mental foundations of their enemies. After 1258, the idea of Mongol invincibility hardened into certainty. The road west now seemed wide open, and Egypt appeared to be the last meaningful obstacle left. Many believed it was only a matter of time before Cairo suffered the same fate as Baghdad. Yet beneath the surface of this fear and collapse, a different response was forming, one that did not accept inevitability, and one that would soon challenge the Mongol legend itself. Kitbuqa marched west confident of victory after the destruction of Baghdad. The Mongol advance into the Levant was led by Kitbuqa, one of the most trusted and experienced commanders of the Mongol Empire. Kitbuqa was not a reckless warrior chasing glory. He was a disciplined professional shaped by years of campaigning under Mongol command. He had seen armies collapse at the mere rumor of Mongol arrival, and he had personally overseen victories that reinforced the belief that resistance was pointless. To him, the march toward Egypt was not a question of if, but when. Syria and Palestine fell with little meaningful opposition, their rulers either fleeing or submitting without serious resistance. Each surrendered city confirmed Kitbuqa's confidence that the Mongol system was flawless. What made Kitbuqa especially dangerous was his absolute faith in Mongol superiority. He believed Mongol tactics were universally effective, regardless of terrain or enemy. Feigned retreats, rapid cavalry strikes, and relentless pressure had never failed him before. Reports reached him that a Mamluk army was assembling in Egypt, but he dismissed them as another doomed force clinging to false hope. From his perspective, the Mamluks were merely the next name on a long list of defeated enemies. However, there was a hidden weakness in this confidence. At this moment in history, the main Mongol armies were absent, recalled east due to internal power struggles following the death of the great Khan. Kitbuqa's force, though still formidable, was smaller than the armies that had destroyed Baghdad. Yet this reality did not trouble him. Experience had taught him that numbers mattered less than fear, speed, and discipline. As he advanced toward Palestine, Kitbuqa expected the same outcome every Mongol commander had enjoyed for decades: a brief clash, a broken enemy, and another step toward total domination. What he did not realize was that, for the first time, he was marching toward an opponent who had studied Mongol warfare deeply and was preparing not to flee, not to surrender, but to trap him. The rise of the Mamluks and a different kind of army. While much of the Middle East trembled after the fall of Baghdad, Egypt responded in a way no one expected. Power there rested in the hands of the Mamluks, a warrior elite unlike the feudal armies the Mongols had crushed elsewhere. The Mamluks were not farmers called to war or nobles fighting for prestige. They were professional soldiers, taken young, trained relentlessly, and conditioned to live for combat alone. From childhood, their lives revolved around discipline, loyalty, and mastery of war. They trained daily with horses, bows, swords, and armor, forging an army built on skill rather than numbers. This system created warriors who did not panic easily and commanders who understood the psychology of battle. Among these leaders stood Baibars, a man whose rise was driven by intelligence as much as courage. Baibars did not share the widespread belief that Mongols were invincible. Instead, he studied them carefully. He listened to survivors, examined past battles, and identified patterns in Mongol behavior. He understood that their greatest strength was speed and deception, But he also realized that these strengths depended heavily on terrain and enemy reactions. Baibars knew that most armies lost to Mongols because they played the Mongols' game, chasing retreating horsemen across open land until their formations collapsed. The Mamluks would not make that mistake. They trained specifically to resist panic, maintain cohesion, and execute complex maneuvers under pressure. More importantly, Baibars understood that defeating the Mongols required breaking their confidence, not just their lines. If the myth of Mongol invincibility could be shattered, even once, the psychological balance of the entire region would change. As Kitbuqa advanced west with certainty, the Mamluks prepared in silence, not for survival, but for a decisive confrontation that would test whether discipline, planning, and deception could finally overcome fear itself. Choosing Ain Jalut as a deadly trap, Baibars understood something most commanders ignored when facing the Mongols. Battles are not decided only by courage or numbers, but by ground. For decades, Mongol victories depended on wide-open plains where their cavalry could move freely, surround enemies, and rain arrows from every direction. Fighting the Mongols on such terrain was almost always suicide. Baibars refused to repeat that mistake. Instead of waiting behind city walls or retreating deeper into Egypt, he made a bold decision to meet the Mongols on carefully chosen ground. The location was Ain Jalut, a narrow valley in Palestine surrounded by hills and broken terrain. This place limited speed, restricted large cavalry maneuvers, and disrupted the Mongols' greatest advantage, mobility. Ain Jalut was not an obvious choice. It forced the Mamluks to confront the Mongols directly, something few armies had dared to do. But Baibars did not intend a traditional battle. He intended a trap. The valley allowed him to hide units behind hills and ridges, keeping large portions of his army completely out of Mongol sight. Every path, slope, and choke point was studied in advance. Signals were planned, positions memorized, and timing rehearsed. The goal was not immediate victory, but controlled deception. Baibars knew the Mongols trusted their instincts and past successes. If they saw an enemy retreat, they would pursue. If they sensed weakness, they would press forward aggressively. Ain Jalut was designed to exploit that mindset. The Mamluks would appear vulnerable, draw the Mongols inward, and then strike once escape and maneuver were no longer possible. This was a dangerous gamble. If the timing failed or discipline broke, the Mamluks could be annihilated. But Baibars believed that discipline and preparation would outweigh fear. While Kitbuqa advanced, expecting another straightforward victory, the battlefield itself was already working against him. Ain Jalut was quiet, narrow, and seemingly insignificant. But beneath that calm surface lay the foundations of one of the most decisive traps in medieval military history. The battle begins and the illusion of Mongol victory. When the two armies finally made contact at Ain Jalut, everything appeared to confirm Mongol expectations. The Mamluks advanced boldly, engaging Mongol units with swift cavalry strikes and volleys of arrows. Dust filled the valley, horses screamed, and steel clashed as the first exchanges unfolded. To Kitbuqa and his officers, the opening moments looked familiar and reassuring. The Mongols absorbed the initial attacks with discipline, returning fire and pushing forward methodically. Then just as suddenly the Mamluk front line began to withdraw. Their formations pulled back in apparent disorder, giving ground step by step. To an outside observer, it looked like fear had finally taken hold. This was the exact pattern Mongol commanders had exploited countless times before. Enemy pressure followed by panic followed by collapse. Kitbuqa saw the signs he wanted to see. He interpreted the retreat not as strategy but as weakness. Convinced that the Mamluks were breaking, he ordered a full pursuit. Mongol cavalry surged forward, eager to finish the fight quickly and decisively. As they chased the retreating Mamluks deeper into the valley, formations stretched and cohesion weakened. Units pushed ahead at different speeds, driven by confidence and habit rather than caution. The narrow terrain forced Mongol riders closer together, limiting their ability to maneuver freely. Still, Kitbuqa believed momentum was on his side. The Mongols had always won this way, by turning enemy retreats into total destruction. What he did not realize was that the Mamluk withdrawal was perfectly controlled. No panic, no collapse, no loss of command. Every step back followed a plan rehearsed in advance. The Mongols were not chasing a defeated enemy. They were being guided, deliberately and patiently, into the heart of a trap. The battle, in Kitbuqa's mind, was already won. In reality, it was only just beginning. The secret Mamluk trick is revealed as the Mongol cavalry pressed deeper into Ain Jalut. The battlefield suddenly changed its character. The retreating Mamluk units halted almost at once, turning in perfect coordination to face their pursuers. What moments earlier had looked like disorder revealed itself as disciplined control. Horns echoed through the valley, sharp and unmistakable, signaling the next phase of Baibars' plan. From behind the surrounding hills, Mamluk units that had been completely hidden surged forward at full speed. Heavy cavalry poured down the slopes, while archers emerged from elevated positions, unleashing volleys into the packed Mongol formations below. In an instant, the Mongols realized they were no longer the hunters, but the prey. The narrow valley robbed them of the space they needed to maneuver, and their famous mobility collapsed under pressure from all sides. Horses collided, riders struggled to regroup, and commands were lost in the chaos. This was the secret Mamluk trick, using the Mongols' own favored tactic, the feigned retreat against them, but executing it within terrain designed to neutralize every Mongol advantage. For generations, Mongol armies had destroyed enemies by drawing them into reckless pursuits across open ground. At Ain Jalut, that instinct was turned into a fatal weakness. The Mongols tried to break out, but every direction was contested. Mamluk cavalry struck their flanks with brutal force, while arrows rained down from positions the Mongols could not easily reach. Panic, a feeling rarely experienced by Mongol soldiers, began to spread. Officers shouted orders, but the noise of battle drowned out commands. The psychological shock was immense. The Mongols had never been trapped like this before. Their confidence, built over decades of uninterrupted victory, cracked under the realization that they had been outmaneuvered. Baibars had not simply countered Mongol tactics. He had anticipated their instincts and exploited them perfectly. The battlefield at Ain Jalut became a place of confusion and desperation, where Mongol discipline was tested to its limits. In that moment, the myth of Mongol invincibility began to collapse. Not through brute force alone, but through deception so precise that it turned certainty into chaos within minutes. Kitbuqa's last stand and the collapse of Mongol control as the trap at Ain Jalut fully closed. The Mongol army found itself in a situation it had never truly faced before. Surrounded, constrained by terrain, and attacked from multiple directions, their usual responses failed one by one. Orders that would normally restore discipline had little effect amid the noise and confusion of the valley. Horses were exhausted, formations shattered, and the sense of unstoppable momentum that defined Mongol warfare evaporated under relentless pressure. At the center of this chaos stood Kitbuqa, refusing to retreat or surrender. True to his reputation, he attempted to rally his remaining forces, personally leading counterattacks to break through the Mamluk lines. His courage was undeniable, but courage alone could not undo the strategic disaster unfolding around him. Every attempt to push forward was met with disciplined resistance, while fresh Mamluk units rotated into the fight, maintaining pressure without losing cohesion. Unlike previous enemies who collapsed under Mongol aggression, the Mamluks held their ground and pressed harder. The psychological balance had completely reversed. Mongol soldiers, once feared for their calm under fire, now experienced doubt and confusion. They were fighting an enemy that did not flee, did not break, and seemed to anticipate every move. As losses mounted, escape routes disappeared. Kitbuqa's refusal to withdraw, while honorable, sealed the fate of his army. Eventually, surrounded and overwhelmed, he was captured after fierce resistance. His execution on the battlefield was not just the death of a commander, but a symbolic moment of enormous significance. For the first time, a Mongol general had been decisively defeated and killed in open battle by a prepared enemy. News of Kitbuqa's fall spread rapidly, carried by survivors and witnesses. The Mongol army at Ain Jalut was shattered, not merely pushed back, but destroyed as a fighting force. What had begun as a confident advance ended in catastrophic defeat. In the dust and blood of that narrow valley, the Mongols lost more than soldiers and a commander. They lost the illusion of inevitability that had protected them for generations. The world would soon understand that the Mongols could be beaten, and that realization would change everything that followed. Shockwaves across the world after Ain Jalut. The defeat at Ain Jalut did not remain confined to one battlefield or one army. Its consequences spread rapidly across the known world, carried by merchants, envoys, and survivors who struggled to describe what they had witnessed. For decades, the Mongols had been the ultimate symbol of unstoppable conquest. Suddenly, that image was shattered. News that a Mongol army had been decisively defeated in open battle was almost unbelievable. Many refused to accept it at first, assuming the reports were exaggerated or false. But as confirmations arrived from multiple sources, the truth became undeniable. The Mongols were not invincible. This realization caused a profound psychological shift. Rulers who had once considered surrender as their only option began to rethink their strategies. Armies that had previously avoided confrontation now believed resistance was possible under the right conditions. The balance of fear, which had always favored the Mongols, began to tilt. For the Mamluks, Ain Jalut was more than a victory. It was proof that discipline, preparation, and intelligent use of terrain could overcome even the most feared enemy. Their confidence soared, and their political position in the Islamic world strengthened dramatically. Egypt emerged as the central power capable of defending the region from further Mongol expansion. For the Mongols, the defeat exposed critical vulnerabilities. Their reliance on mobility, intimidation, and predictable enemy reactions had limits. When those elements were neutralized, even Mongol discipline could falter. Ain Jalut also halted Mongol expansion into North Africa permanently. The advance that had destroyed Baghdad and swept through the Levant stopped abruptly. Never again would a Mongol army threaten Egypt in the same way. Strategically, the battle marked the westernmost point of Mongol expansion in the Middle East. Symbolically, it marked the end of an era of unquestioned dominance. The myth that had paralyzed entire civilizations dissolved in a single day of fighting. Ain Jalut became a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to adaptation and intelligence. Strength alone was no longer enough. The world had learned a new lesson, written not in theory, but in blood and broken certainty on the valley floor. The end of the Mongol myth and the lesson of Ain Jalut in the years that followed the Battle of Ain Jalut. Its meaning only grew stronger. What initially seemed like a single, unexpected defeat gradually revealed itself as a turning point in world history. For the first time, the Mongols had been stopped not by chance, not by internal collapse, but by an army that understood them deeply and planned accordingly. Ain Jalut proved that Mongol dominance was not a law of nature, but a product of fear, terrain, and enemy mistakes. Once those factors were addressed, the Mongols could bleed, break, and lose like any other army. For the Mamluks, the victory cemented their legitimacy as rulers and defenders of the Islamic world. Their state gained prestige, authority, and unity, allowing them to dominate regional politics for generations. Baibars emerged as a legendary figure, remembered not just as a warrior, but as a strategist who defeated history's most feared army by outthinking it. The battle also reshaped military thinking beyond the Middle East. Future commanders studied Ain Jalut as a lesson in countering superior forces through preparation, discipline, and deception. It demonstrated that understanding an enemy's habits could be more powerful than matching their strength. Perhaps the most important legacy of Ain Jalut was psychological. Empires rise not only on victories, but on belief. The Mongols had conquered half the world because everyone believed they could not be stopped. Ain Jalut shattered that belief. Once fear cracked, resistance became possible. The Mongols remained powerful after 1260, but they were never again perceived as an unstoppable force of destiny. In a quiet valley in Palestine, the course of history shifted. The lesson was clear and timeless: no power is invincible, and the most dangerous weapon in war is not the sword, but the mind that knows how to use it.